Hi, my name is Neil Patwari. I'm presenting our paper, Speaking of Accent, a content analysis of accent misconceptions in ASR research. This is on behalf of my co-authors, Carrie Prinos and Kathleen Power. This video is being presented at the ACM Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency Conference on the 3rd of June, 2024. There's now a large set of research papers on the bias of ASR systems by accent. Most ASR services perform better on white American speakers of English than on most other demographic groups and nationalities. In general, ASR services perform better on speakers whose accents are historically favored. An accent is a way of speaking a language that varies by cultural or regional group. Accents are loose bundles of prosodic and segmental features distributed over geographic and/or social space, according to Rosina Lippitt-Green. An accent is a fluency of both speakers and listeners. Accents vary by class, caste, race, ethnicity, regional and national origin, and more. Similar to how language is used as a tool to maintain power, so is accent. The British in particular used a differentiated set of English accents to divide and control the Indians that they colonized. In the US, accent discrimination is a component of xenophobia, racism, classism, in addition to colonization. Accents have been subjugated in order to eliminate the culture of oppressed groups. Today, people with accents associated with the Global South are rated by listeners as less intelligent, loyal, and influential. ASR services reproduce this inequity today, and ASR is used in safety-critical applications. Transcription accuracy is critical for physicians while they're transcribing their patient notes, which is now done by ASR. And instructors like me, mandatory transcription is on the horizon, and some instructors will have to spend much more time to fix the transcription errors than others. Halcyon Lawrence, a native speaker of Caribbean English, describes trying to communicate with her voice-activated navigation device in a rental car and having to eventually fake a white American accent to get it to work. She says, to create conditions where accent choice is not negotiable by the speaker is hostile. To impose an accent upon another is violent. This quote stems from a history of forced cultural erasure. Research to point out or address these ASR accent biases has been growing. However, our observation was that researchers seemed to hold some misunderstandings about how accent works. The research in our paper came from the idea that we could find out how research in our field operationalize accent. That is, what do they think accent is? Our paper answers in particular two questions, which I will cover next. First question is what we call the unaccented default question. That is, to what extent do papers assume that there is one standard accent and that speakers of this accent are unaccented? Accents such as African American English, Southern American English, and what is called Standard American English all have standard consistent rules. So everybody has an accent. And this assumption that one is standard is a problem because it makes some people's accents invisible while making other people's accents hypervisible. And it makes work on ASR accent equity just more difficult. The second question is what we call the speaker-based question. That is, to what extent is accent understood to be an attribute of the speaker without also being recognized as an attribute of the listener? This question comes from our understanding that both speakers and listeners have accent fluencies. We know this in communication theory that a demodulator must be designed for the particular modulation used at the transmitter. A human listener best understands speakers if they have experience and fluency in listening to their accent. This is often forgotten. For example, speakers are sometimes pathologized for speaking with a disfavored accent, whereas listeners who are unable to understand that accent are never pathologized for their listening disability. We followed the example of Oskies in their Misgendering Machines paper at CSCW 2018, and our method is content analysis, and our goal is to analyze the most recent publications in influential venues. We searched for ASR papers and required either accent or dialect to find papers with any discussion of accent. And we found the conferences and venues with more than 3 matching papers in a 5-year period, and then picked the top 7 venues by SJR rank. We started this in May 2013, and 2022 was the most recent full year. So we matched for 2022 and found 31 papers that met our search criteria. 9 of them were excluded, though, because they didn't actually contain any substantive text about ASR or accent. So we ended with a list of 22 papers, and we have 2 of us coders who read all the papers and coded them primarily to answer questions 1 and 2. All of the papers are published in English, but reported on ASR studies in different languages. The full results are in the paper, but to summarize the results on question 1, most papers assume an unaccented default. More than a quarter state that some speakers have no accent. For example, one paper has participants rate speech on a scale where 1 is no accent / negligible accent. Moreover, 91% of the set assume that one accent is standard or default in the language of study. For example, explicitly naming some speech as normal speech, or listing human accent along with background noise and multi-talker speech as a problem that degrades ASR performance. While the vast majority have a default accent, this 91%, only 14% of papers name that standard accent, for example, naming Parisian accent or California English as the standard. To summarize the results on question 2, papers almost never talk about the accent fluency of any listener to the speech that is discussed in the paper. Most, 59%, never mention a listener at all. Of the 9 papers that do mention a listener, they primarily do in the context of conversational agents, or they name that speech pathologists or human participants listen to and rate speech. 6 of these 9 never mention the accent of the listener. And only 1 paper even partially describes the accent of a transcriber. They say 13 Native American speakers were recruited as annotators, which is ambiguous, but we assume that it means that speakers born in the US, not people indigenous to the Americas. In short, our research on ASR papers in 2022 shows that we are largely mistakenly and incompletely modeling accent. This has particular implications. Emily Bender pioneered the rule now called the Bender rule that NLP papers must name the language that they're studying. And extending Bender's implications, one problem we have when ASR research doesn't name the accent under study, it implies that research on standard accents generalize, but research on non-standard accents doesn't, and thus the latter is less valuable. Generally, ASR work that moves us towards accent equity is considered a different, less valuable type of work. This happens in industry for folks working on our most popular ASR services. Laura Benjamin describes the experience of an Apple engineer working to localize Siri to different global English accents. At some point, he asks his boss, "What about African American English?" To this, his boss responded, "Well, Apple products are for the premium market." While shocking, this is all predictable given how branding works. This is one clue that the bias of ASR services is not purely due to the lack of training data. It also is based on societal bias. Joy Buolamwini says that those who with the power to build AI systems do not have a monopoly on truth, and that is particularly true in ASR. There's a need for us to name what intersectional groups are included in the datasets we collect and use, and in particular, who is included in transcribing of that speech, because their label of the ground truth, regardless of their accent fluency, is considered the truth. And there's a need for inclusion to avoid talking about power when we talk about accents. Accents are not neutral, apolitical categories. We should name the impact of inequity in our system, and this shows up in the papers in our set. For example, papers talking about teaching code switching is purely a positive apolitical educational goal, which it is not, given the history of subjugating African American English within the US educational system. Also, blackface and yellowface have particularly terrible histories associated with racism in the US, and we should recognize this when talking about speech systems that translate one accent to another. In summary, our paper addresses the question, how do ASR researchers operationalize accent? We find a lot of misconceptions in mainstream state-of-the-art research papers. We're not doing this work, though, to shame authors. Even authors with personal experience with accent discrimination may be forced to follow existing disciplinary norms on how to describe accent in order to be acceptable to reviewers. Our goal is to change norms about how we talk about ASR in our papers. And our paper is just one step towards this goal. In particular, our search terms may exclude papers related to other ways that systems of oppression intersect with ASR. For example, the impact of gender and disability on speech is not usually referred to as accent or dialect, and thus may not have appeared in our search. We studied only conferences and journals in 2022, and work to extend this across the years could track how this changes over time. With that, I'll leave you with the citation to our paper, and thank you for your attention.